Hi, folks. This is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on Fat Burning Man, where we talk about real food and real results. Today's episode of the show is with a returning guest. His name is Mark Devine, and he's an expert in human performance as it's displayed in mental toughness, leadership, and physical readiness. Mark is a true Renaissance man, as you'll see on this show. He's a former top-ranked Navy SEAL, CPA and MBA professor, and has built a half dozen multi-million-dollar companies. No big deal. Now, before we get to the show with Mark, I want to just quickly tell you that we totally redesigned our website. We just launched it and at fatburningman.com and have loads of really cool content coming up down the road. We have blogs. I have a whole new video course and many other things. And the best way to get them is by putting in your email address at fatburningman.com. And that way you get all of the free goodies, as well as a few really special announcements that we have coming up in the next few weeks that I can't tell you about quite yet. But best way to stay in touch and get all the free goodies is to go to fatburningman.com and sign up for the email list. So I'll see you there and be talking to you soon. All right, so on to the show with Mark Devine. We talk about why the best defense is a good offense, how failing loudly and publicly will make you a champion, why successful people are constantly uncomfortable, I can vouch for that, how to unbalance your competitors to win at anything, and much, much more. All right, let's go hang out with Mark. All right, folks, Mark Devine is a returning guest here to chat about his epic new book, Way of the SEAL, where you can think like an elite warrior to lead and succeed. How's it going, Mark?
Great, Abel. Great.
Awesome.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. So I was just telling Mark before this interview that his past interview was one of my favorites. Personally, it hits me right at the heart because Mark is clearly a not only a high performer, but teaches other people to totally kick butt with pretty much everything that they do. And what's especially cool about your work, Mark, is that it's very interdisciplinary, such that you kind of learn the foundation, which is food and fitness, and then on top of that, everything else that you learn borrows from Eastern practices, as well as, hardcore Navy SEAL training and business and everything else that you've learned. So I think that there's just an enormous amount that people can learn from you in terms of achieving whatever you want to achieve. But let's just start with the foundation, as we were talking about before this interview, which is nutrition. You said something that I thought was right on point. That's basically like, how are you supposed to lead other people if you don't have your nutrition in check? So why don't we vamp on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I think in our society we've become so reductionist, and so we take all these domains of knowledge and we slice and splice it down to these little as narrowly defined niche as you can, and then all these experts then will kind of pigpile on that, and then it becomes separated from the whole, right?
Yeah.
So in the context of nutrition, it's become separated from the individual, looking at the individual as a performance machine in one context, or as an integrated human being in another. And so I've been teaching leadership from the perspective of peak performance, and for peak performance to happen as a leader, well, then your body and your mind have to be optimized. And how do you optimize your body and mind? It's not just with the thoughts you think or the way you move. It's it's root level, how your cells are functioning, how your systems is functioning, how your chemical processing are functioning, and how your hormonal systems are in balance. And those are most affected by what you put in your body, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's very simple to look at a high performance automobile, and it doesn't matter how expensive your Lamborghini is. If you fill it with, it's not going to run very well. You know what I mean? So as a SEAL, I noticed this very, very acutely when we were performing in the field. When our nutritional intake was affected because all we had available was an MRE, or sometimes whatever the local flora and fauna provided, then our performance, mine in particular, because I use myself as a test lab rat, as you do, I'm sure.
Yeah.
My performance was noticeably different, and so it just makes sense, right, that you treat your body system as a holistic entity that is, and what you put into then affects both the physical and psychological aspects of your being.
Yeah, absolutely. So that must be a very unique challenge, especially when you're in the field. How do you knowing what you need to eat in order to be healthy and perform at your
Hmm.
best. How do you do that when you're, in Baghdad or whatever?
It's difficult. First of all, knowledge is important. You can go to a military chow hall and select, the best of the bad options to
Yeah.
start and avoid, a lot of the crap, and then to supplement, right? It, I'm a big proponent of supplementation. I'm not a purist by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a practical, pragmatic eater.
Yeah.
And when you're not getting the nutrition that you need, you must supplement. And so, find high quality supplements. It's easy to get them shipped to you as a military operator these days, and a lot of them are available overseas. So you find those supplementations that you need. And the other thing is, I think it makes sense to eat. Your body can process even bad food in small quantities
Hmm.
and intermittently, right? And so if all you got is a candy bar on a long mission, then eat it. It's going to provide you sustenance, and it's going to be way better than being a purist and saying, no, I can't eat that sugar, I can't eat that candy bar,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You've got to basically eat what you can to survive, and then get back on track when you get back into garrison living, or
Right.
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Well, and that in and of itself is kind of natural, isn't it? Because if you look back evolutionarily speaking, anyway, we wouldn't always have the ideal foods around us all of the time. There would be times of abundance and times where you just kind of have to get by based around what's been, fermenting in the back of the cave for the past 3 months or whatever. So it's really more about survival and doing the best that you can, as opposed to sticking to your guns and saying, I'm not going to eat anything that's not super high quality, even though there's nothing that coming my way in the next 7 days that will be high quality.
I don't address nutrition in the way of the SEAL, but I have a new book coming out called 8 Weeks to SEAL Fit, which is kind of my training program, and I have a chapter on nutrition in the training program, and I recommend kind of a quasi modified paleo-ish diet,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, again, back to this fact that I'm not a purist, and one of the things that I've noted in my life as 20 years in the SEAL teams is that the body can handle so much more disparity in the
Mm.
types of food we eat, and in the quantity, and in the time that we eat. And actually, my premises, or my belief, is that the human body actually is well served by changing it up. Just
Yeah.
like with functional fitness, variety is the spice of life, so to speak. And when it comes to food, variety is really good. And so, if like our paleo ancestors, if food is unavailable for a while, that's good for your
Yeah.
body, as long as you don't die from it, right? It's good. It's good to go without. And so that whole field of intermittent fasting is kind of testing that theory. Like,
Hmm.
it's good to go without for longer periods of time. And it's also, I believe, that we just eat too much,
Yeah.
because of the plentitude in our society. And so your bodies get used to this normal of eating way more food than you need.
Hmm.
And I train often 2 to 3 hours a day with our SEAL Fit training, and there's days where I'll go and I'm just not hungry. My body just says, I don't need to sit down and have a big meal at all, and so I'll
Right.
just graze a little bit, and I have plenty of energy, right? And so the body is remarkably adaptive and resilient, and I think people have just become way too accustomed to this massive abundance of food and 3 sit-down meals a day, and it's just too much.
Yeah. And one thing I think you have unique insight into is, I think, the fact that we've all kind of lost touch with how hard life used to be,
Right.
and how we did have to do the best that we could just to get by and survive. Can you you already just touched upon that, but can you expand on that a little bit more? Like, what is it like to feel like you might die at any moment, or know that your food might not be coming, or know that you have to fast for 72 hours or something like that? Like, what is that like, and what does that do to you moving forward in the way that you live your life in the cushy world that most of us live in?
That is such a great question. I think you're the first one who's ever asked me that question. That is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And if you come out to SEAL Fit Training Center, I will give you a full-on taste. That's like
I bet.
now. So that is like a magical thing. The I believe the human spirit thrives on challenge, And when it doesn't have challenge, it kind of goes a little bit dormant. It gets bored, right? And it starts to play tricks on you. And that's when challenges come to you. And so I have this idea that we should take ourselves to the challenge
Mm-hmm.
and bring it on
Yeah.
in increasing measure, right? As our capabilities for handling that stress and becoming more resilient and more mentally tough, as we develop those skills, then we take on bigger and bigger challenges. If we don't do that, the challenge comes to us and our life is a wreck. It just torpedoes everything, all of our goals, all of our health, and all of a sudden we find ourselves back at ground zero.
Yeah.
Like I said, the human being is meant to be tested and challenged. And when we do this, we grow. We grow at all levels. We grow physically, mentally, emotionally, intuitionally, spiritually. I call those my 5 mountains. And so in my training, I try to test those and to push the envelope on those.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do this, you become almost inoculated against fear. And it's not like a Navy SEAL doesn't experience fear when he's standing on the ramp at 30,000 feet, staring into the abyss,
Yeah.
right? Traveling at 400 miles an hour, knowing that he's going to throw himself off this ramp into the night.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully his parachute will work.
Yeah.
There is no question that there was a knot about a mile wide in my belly every time I did that, right?
Yeah.
Having said that, I was able to mentally manage both my emotions and my thinking mind, my rational mind, to understand that the likelihood of disaster happening is extremely small
Mm-hmm.
because of the training I had put in and the statistical, probability of that parachute failing. And also, I had a really high sense of why I was doing that. Like I'm very connected to why it was important for me to jump off that ramp. Right?
Yeah.
I understood that my life, my job as a Navy SEAL warrior, depended upon mission accomplishment, depended upon me being on the very gritty edge of danger, and to be comfortable with that, to push that envelope.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to fling myself into the abyss time and time again. And each time you do it, it gets a little bit easier. So what happens though is you tend to start to live life in this what has today in today's world become a rarefied place of really lack of fear or highly controlled fear, very very low stress because you managed to learn along the way how to really mitigate stress, how to interrupt the fight or flight response, how to control your mind and emotions in even the presence of extreme danger. And so, for a warrior, that means you run toward the sound of gunfire and you enter the fight with confidence, knowing that there's a really good chance you're going to come out as a victor because of your training and your attitude. And you've got a really great team by your side. And, kind of one of my premises, Abel, with teaching this stuff is like, I want everyone to experience that.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, it's a blast, right? Living life like that is just pure fun and your hair is on fire and everything you do has meaning and purpose and everything else starts to fall away as unimportant. And you don't mind having those really difficult, brutally honest conversations with people, the kind that, most people shirk from because they think they're either politically incorrect or you're going to hurt someone's feelings. Well, guess what? Nothing gets done in an organization, and it's hard to move your life forward if you're cowering from having those really difficult conversations, both with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
with your team, with your loved ones, right, with the community. And you don't have that fear around that anymore,
Mm-hmm.
right? You develop a really thick skin and what might be called grit around those things.
Yeah.
You become very optimistic, yet you prepare for the worst.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting, like what's happening in the world. People think, that the sky is falling and Henny Penny is running around and the sky is falling. And I look at the future, I say, it's like we were talking about Google Glass. I mean, it's brilliant. There's some unbelievably cool things happening and coming down the pike. And yet entire institutions are going to have to break down in order for the new to arise, right? And so just like with goodness, there must be, darkness. You're going to have major disruption, in order to experience the
Mm-hmm.
growth of the human race on the other side of that. And so we want to be optimistic and drive toward that beautiful vision, but prepare ourselves so that we make sure that we're standing there, once the, whatever chaos might befall us, well, whether it's a global warming, inspired tsunami or, insurrection.
That's so true. And that can happen in little ways or in big ways, just in terms of
Right,
preparing for the future. It
right,
was really interesting. I got an email from my dad, which is is a kind of a unique thing because he hunts and pecks and like doesn't really know how to type or whatever. And at the bottom, I saw it said sent from my iPad, which my mom just got a few months ago, and it shocked me that he had like an iPad before I did, and I
right.
like work in software and build apps and stuff and like build websites. And I thought that that was so unique and interesting that that you can see people who were, I know firsthand that my parents were always afraid of computers, didn't really understand them the whole time that I was growing up, and now they embrace it because
Right.
they have to, and that's where the world is going, and it's a really exciting thing that we can do that, and I can literally give them a tour of my new backyard and the place that I just moved to using this crazy device.
Right.
But in order to share that with them, they have to like kind of embrace the future and do that. But to follow on in that point that you talked about before, like embracing the hard stuff or even putting yourself through it on purpose,
Hmm.
I can tell you that at strategic moments in my own life, um, doing those very uncomfortable things, like when I first learned to sing and perform, not just doing it in front of thousands of people, but doing it poorly in front of thousands of people,
Been there, done that.
totally failing. And, like my first jaunt into improv comedy completely fell flat. It was not funny at all and just bombed in front of thousands of people. The time where, you run a marathon for the
Right.
first time, like that takes true grit. And the next time someone says, this class is hard, or my job is difficult, or something like that, or this is a huge pain in the butt, you don't hear it anymore. If you've put yourself through enough of those challenges, and the ones that I've been through really pale in comparison to the ones that you teach and have gone through yourself. But I think everyone can kind of do that, even if it's in a little way. Getting outside of your comfort zone allows you to really embrace the future and get rid of all that noise, like you were
Right.
talking about before. Those little things that seem like they're difficult these days.
No, I totally agree. And it's easy to hide behind, for this generation or like my son's generation, it's easy to hide behind the keyboard or the text, and you don't get to experience that emotional trauma of standing in front of someone and exposing yourself, making yourself that vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And when you make yourself vulnerable as a leader or as a performer, um, that's how you grow, right? Because you're literally saying, "Okay, here's what I got.
Yeah.
Take your shot at me," right? And some of those arrows are going to hit their mark, and you've got to deal with that
Yeah.
pain. Learn from it, and then the next time out, you get a little bit better. And so then that's how you develop that resiliency. Is you're like, okay, you know what? Dust yourself off. That kind of sucked. What did I learn from it? What's the silver lining? How can I improve? Work toward improving, then put yourself out there again. Don't
Yeah.
shy from it just because the first experience was hard.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, use that as transmute that emotion of, you know, fear of failure and maybe shame from, a performance that you thought was abysmal. You transmute that into motivation and
Mm-hmm.
determination, and you get out there and you do it again and then again and then again, and then sheesh, maybe it would only take 20 times before suddenly people are looking at you and saying, Abel, you are an expert, right?
Right.
You're phenomenal. I actually want to pay you for your performance,
Yeah. And that's
right?
what happens.
And that's what
Because
happens.
like you said, the 20 times is a perfect example. I think that number works really well because when I go on other people's shows and they're reading off my biography, it's usually the accomplishments or whatever. And it sounds like a lot, it sounds very impressive. But what they don't read off are those other 19 things,
Yeah, yeah,
or those other,
totally.
if you multiply that by five, like all of those things were absolute failures, and the accomplishments would have been absolutely impossible without going through all of those failures and having all those things completely implode, fizzle out, or
Right,
become more problems than they were worth. So you have to quit early and get out of there,
right,
whatever it is. But that's the stuff that most people don't see. But
right.
I think that you, in the book, you describe it in a really cool way. That's
Yeah.
what is necessary to really perform at a high level. You need
I
to
think,
be horrible most
I,
of the time so that you can
right.
succeed
Gotta
the
push
times that
yourself.
matter.
You got to risk that failure. And the other thing is, we tend to finally get good at something in life and then think, okay, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm a good corporate CEO.
and that's my domain. And then you don't get out of your comfort zone again because you're already operating at a very high level in that domain. And that's a mistake. That's one of the things a lot of the CEOs who come to SealFit have found, or in my Unreal Mind training, is like, I'm really good at what I do, but there's still something missing. There's still a little piece that I feel I'm leaving on the table. And I said, of course, yeah. There's a lot of you actually that you're leaving on the table.
Yeah.
And it's great that you found that success there. But what's next? What else can we do? Where can we push the envelope? And where can we step out and learn something new?
Yeah.
Yesterday, I had a meeting, or just kind of a reacquaintance with a friend of mine named Bill Black, who's a Navy SEAL business owner, firefighter, really incredible guy, Harvard graduate. But this guy is successful in so many ways. He's a Navy SEAL. He's a first responder. He's built a business called Fit Deck, and he's reached a few million in sales there. He was recently on Shark Tank. His
really?
pitching. And I'm like, Phil, what's next for you?
Yeah.
Because we're always like, because he was lauding all my accomplishments, and I had the same conversation you just had. That, hey, you haven't seen all those abysmal failures, along the way. And I said, so what's next for you? Where are you going to take this? And he goes, well, it's funny you should say that, but I just wrote a one-man play.
Really?
Like, I didn't know that you were a playwright. He goes, I'm not. I have no idea what I'm doing. But I wrote a one-man play about my life experiences, and I pitched it to San Diego State University, and they're going to help me produce this. I'm like, holy, that's awesome. I mean, he's going to really put himself out there in the most vulnerable way possible on stage, alone, to tell his life story. Wow. And I said, well, what's your why for doing that? I mean, let's say it bombs. What's going to make it a success? And he said, well, first and foremost, I'm doing it for my sons. So I want them to know me that intimately.
Wow.
Right? Beyond what they see as me as a father.
That's so cool.
Like, okay, that's going to be successful. I don't care how well you do on stage.
Right.
I mean, that's a beautiful purpose for doing something like that.
Yeah.
But to tie it back in is he's a Navy SEAL. Like, he has conquered fear compared to most people in humanity, and yet he's doing one of the things that most people would they'd rather get run over by a bus than get on stage and perform.
Yeah. Like Seinfeld said, you're better off in the coffin than giving the eulogy out of fear of public speaking, which is so true for most people. But you just have to, people, I do a lot of speaking now, and people come at, they're just like, after I talk or whatever, they're just like, wow, you're such a naturally talented speaker. And I'm just like, no, I'm not. Like, you have to just bomb and bomb and bomb. And then eventually you have to get good, because you've done it so much, and you sacrificed so much. But I would love to cover this, which I hadn't really heard talked about in this way before your book. But you talk about living life and always taking the position of the offense as opposed to defense. And I think that that's so cool. And I can apply that to pretty much everything right now. Just email is a great example of that. I get many hundreds of emails every day. And I feel like I just had this conversation with my team yesterday that our work always should come first, because other people's agendas, that we don't even know or work with or whatever, if you're constantly responding to them, you can never actually change the world in your own way and move forward with your own personal or business goals or team goals or what have you. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of focusing on the offense? The best defense is a good offense, as some basketball gods have said.
I mean, it's such a integral concept for, I think, peak living. Let me start it by relating it to a typical SEAL mission, right? We go out the door and we expect that the plan, our perfect, beautiful plan, is, going to fail soon.
Yeah.
And so we expect that. We have contingencies lined up. We have, mental models for how to respond to the threats that come at us, so that we find victory in the moments that they need to be found. And in essence, fail our way forward to victory. And it's a very offensive approach to, attacking the mission, right? We do not wait for something to happen. We do not even think of defense. It's like Chesty Puller said when the Marines were attacked at Chosin, they attacked to the rear. right? They didn't retreat.
Yeah.
So the Marines are offensive in that regard. And so how does this relate to you? I think your example is spot on, right? Everything we do in life, we first ask ourselves, why are we doing this? And is it serving me to move my dial, my personal dial toward my goals, toward my purpose? Is it going to make my life better, or my team's life, or our company's life? If it's not, then question, does it need to be done at all, or does it need to be done now? And so how we approach, organizing our days, organizing our life, ensuring that we're spending the right time on the right things in the right order is all part of being offensive.
Yeah.
And one of the metaphors I like to use is that we want to be the subject and not the object of our life story. And for the life story to unfold the way we want it to, then we've got to be the author and the subject. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we are the subject, but we're writing the script, and we know how each chapter ends, and we've got a good vision for how the book unfolds, even though we don't know the specifics in detail. But we know the end is going to be good because we can visualize it. We see what that looks like. And so along the way, we're writing the script. In the context of a fight, like I teach self-defense on the pointy edge of the spear of SEALFIT. You have to work your way to get there because it tends to be very aggressive, spirit fighting. And it's meant to inoculate you against failure at any kind of altercation that has a strong purpose. The awareness keeps you away from the fight, but let's say you get ambushed or something, then you need to know how to handle yourself.
Yeah.
And it's very, very offensive mind. We eradicate any defensive verbology. Like, we don't talk or teach blocking or retreating. It's just full on attack, and we're attacking targets that are vulnerable. And the whole idea is to stay 1 to 2 steps in front of your attacker, in the business context, 1 to 2 steps in front of your competition, and to ensure that your actions are causing them to react.
Mm-hmm.
And so by taking actions that are going to be surprising, are going to be faster than other people, are going to be unique and unconventional, then it's causing, those around us who are on the periphery, trying to maybe slow us down or to get in the way of our goals. It causes them to react, and that slows them down.
Yeah.
In the fields, we used a mental model called the OODA loop, which was developed by a fighter pilot in the Air Force named John Boyd. And the OODA loop is an acronym for it's OODA. It's observe. And so in the context of a fight, observe your relationship to the enemy, then orient yourself to it, make a decision, that's the D, and then act. And the idea is to tighten up your OODA loop, make it really fast. So you're always observing, orienting, deciding, acting, observing, orienting, deciding, acting. And then when you act with something that's going to surprise and unbalance your enemy so that their OODA loop either gets severed or expands. So because all of a sudden you did something surprising, now their observation causes them to stop and pause. And their orientation to that now gets confused because they were oriented to you being over here, and all of a sudden you're over here. And so then their decision process gets slowed down and their actions are weaker. And so you're tightening yours up and moving fast, and you just blaze right by them. And I think this is one of the reasons why, it's estimated that 40% of Fortune 500 companies are going to be gone within the next 3 years. And companies, Google's probably not the best example, but, like Indiegogo and some of these new tech companies that are growing up with a team of 10 people. Mm-hmm. Airbnb is another great example. 10 people, right? Creating $1 billion market cap company in 2 to 3 years. Unheard of, unprecedented.
Right.
It's because their OODA loop is really tight because they've leveraged these exponential technologies of crowdsourcing and crowdfunding and, 3D printing and all this crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the way of the future. And I think organizations and leaders need to start thinking like that.
Yeah. And so I wasn't planning to talk about this at all, but I think it really is relevant to the rest of the conversation. Can I ask you why you have Google Glass?
I got Google Glass because I wanted to experience where Google was going with this technology. I didn't know if I had a use for it, and admittedly, it was an expensive decision. Sure. It cost me $1,700. And I was really excited when I got them, and I played around with them. And like the conversation we had earlier, it felt like an incomplete solution. Like
Yeah.
very cool, getting somewhere, but for me, beyond me wearing them on the Seal Fit grinder and videotaping a Seal Fit workout from a first person perspective,
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of a cool use.
Yeah.
And then I can kind of touch it and upload it to Facebook. I think it's the same reason you got the Galaxy Tab, right?
Yeah.
It's to always see and stay on the cutting edge, and to help get inside of the developers, get inside of the thought leaders of those companies,
Mm-hmm.
and to see where they're going. Because they're if a device has finally made it to market, well, they're already working on the 2 year out
Yeah.
plan. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's part of the way that I've trained my mind to think is to look for trends and to be on the cutting edge of that, and so that I can percolate that back into my business and into my thinking.
Yeah.
I think Google Glass is a trend. I think what Google's doing with robotics and some of their goals is going to make them a dominant player. And frankly, I'm investing in Google because I think where they're going is a far different place than where they've been and where we've come to think of them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's a very similar reason as to why I got Google Glass and a couple of other, gadgets. I often get those things because we do develop software and apps and other like cutting edge things. But even more than that, it's an offensive strategy to see where the world is going.
Right.
So, I mean, that also, if we want to tie it back to nutrition and training, it's like, you don't really find me on this show arguing with people about Weight Watchers and whether it works or not, because that's so irrelevant to the future, I believe. Because we already, let's just say real food works, like real nutrition works, effective high intensity training works. But what's going to happen in the years to come is something that you really need to pay attention to if you want to be on that cutting edge and kind of like ride that wave of exponential growth like you're talking about, whether it relates to fitness, nutrition, business, personal development, technology, or really anything else. And one of the cool things about your book is that it really works all those things into it. I would love to get you to talk about, one of my favorite parts actually was near the back of the book. I don't think I can even make it look that great on a webcam, but your weekly training plan is something that's super cool, I think. Let's see if this... Okay, so yeah, if you're watching on video, you can kind of see the general idea of what this looks like. But Mark, could you just walk us through what your either typical day or typical week looks like?
Sure. Before I do that, I wanted to kind of just add one final kind of comment to what you were just talking
hit
about.
it.
Exponential technologies and where we're going. All the technologies in the world aren't going to, they're going to make our lives either much, much simpler and more effective, or they're just going to confuse the shit out of people.
Yeah.
And, they're going to be devices that sit on the shelf.
Yeah.
And so the reality is you kind of upgrade yourself as technology gets upgraded. And there's no quick fix. I mean, I have a problem with the hacking community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not the software hacking community, but those who think you can just biohack or create all these hacks to shortcut development. Now, there are certain things you can do to quickly accelerate your growth, but ultimately it requires a commitment and a discipline and a long-term orientation to it, right?
Right.
You can't take a pill to make yourself smarter, like in that movie.
Limitless, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's awesome. I mean, I love that idea.
Right.
And if I could have a pill that would make you mentally tough like a Navy
I've tried those pills. It's not like that.
It don't work. Exactly. I know. So anyways, the weekly training plan is really the integrated training that I offer, throughout the book, that I show how I build it into my life. And I want, one of the sayings I have is I eat my own dog food. And we here at the Seal Fit Training Center, we eat our own dog food. We do what works, we discard what doesn't, and we only offer that which is working for us. And if someone came around and said, hey, this is really working for me, I will test it out. And if it's better than what I'm doing, guess what? That gets inserted, the other thing gets ejected. So this is really a living philosophy. There's a few components to it. I mentioned the five critical pillars of the 5 intelligences that I try to develop in my trainees. Physical, right? Physical prowess, physical development, which includes eating well and moving functionally and having a high degree of physical preparedness and physical health, right? And so that in and of itself is, topic of another book, let's just say, which is coming out. Mental development. That's the whole start, where I start with my own Beal Mind program. So how do we access the full capacity of our human mind? And we got to begin with thinking, or realizing that our mind is more than our just critical thinking faculty, right? It includes, there's a lot there. There's a lot of ways that we need to learn how to unthink. And there's a lot of ways we can learn how to tap into deeper layers of our mind, right? Emotional intelligence and intuitive intelligence and subconscious thinking and all that kind of stuff, creativity, things that you naturally do if you start to get into creative arts and those things. Well, how do we train that? And so that's one thing I try to tap into. And then I alluded to these other already, but emotional resiliency and control and intuitive depth and awareness. And then the last is your spirit, right? As it makes sense to you, right? Of course, connecting to a higher power and having that expression is important. But for me, I'm also talking about your willpower, your non-quitting spirit, that part of you that is like fired up when you challenge yourself and when you make deep commitments, right? So these aspects, these intelligences, I develop drills and training practices around that include things I've drawn from yoga, the martial arts, skills, functional fitness, different things that I've been using for years, and then I've kind of brought them together. I like to say I've taken the foo out of kung fu.
Yeah.
So they're really simple and they work for everybody. And so what I've done is now shown how you don't have to quit your job to do this training, because what you can do is there's three primary training periods in the day. One is when you wake up, and I have a morning routine that I recommend. I call the morning ritual. That includes some breathing exercises, some somatic movement. I recommend yoga, but they're real simple drills. You get 90% of the benefits of yoga with 5 minutes of practice. And then some visualization and connecting in with your, what I call your 3 Ps, your purpose, your passion, and your principles, right? Every day, ground yourself in that. And there's a few other components. It's very powerful training. And then it's your physical training, right? However that's going to play out with your weekly strategy, right? Whether you do CrossFit or SEALFit or just go to the gym or run, walk, bike, swim, you build your training plan and you make sure you stick to that physical training. Then how we approach the physical training is part of my training, right? So instead of just going out for a bike ride, we go out for a bike ride and we use it to develop our awareness, right? We use it to develop our deep breathing, and so we layer the skills into things that we're already doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Same thing throughout the day. If you're a corporate executive and you go to the office, you practice the box breathing drill on your way to the office, which is going to completely, set the ground or the stage for a stress-free day. You practice the positivity, what dog am I feeding drills. You visualize yourself, dominating everything that's happening during the day. Your board meetings, your sales meetings. So that's done kind of in progress as you go through your day. You're working in your mind and on yourself while you're working in the business, on the business. So a great chunk of time to work in some training is the lunch hour when everyone else is off, having to sit down lunch. That's a great time to do some yoga or do some of the drills that I recommend in the book, or to get some really focused work done, right? Undistracted work. So I think, I use it for both purposes, but rarely will I go out to lunch and subject myself to, that time, unless there's a good reason for it, right? Yeah. Like I said, with my wife or with, business meeting. In the afternoon, you're pretty much, let's say your brain can really focus when you're focusing the right way. And we talked about this earlier, not just responding to email and, typical, scenario is your productivity has been cut to 20 or 30% of the day because of all these distractions and surfing the net and whatnot. But when you train your mind to really focus, you really want to focus in blocks of, let's say, an hour, and then give your mind a break to recover. So let's say you've done some training from 12 to 1 or something. Now you're going to really focus. So focus for an hour, take a 5-minute break at 2 o'clock. And that 5-minute break, take a brisk walk or do some box breathing or, do a quick yoga drill, do something that's going to be, that's going to affect you rather than just going and getting a cup of coffee. It's going to affect you in a dramatic and positive way. And I call those resets, right? And so you have these moments to reset yourself psychologically, physiologically, and to ensure that you're positive and performance oriented and you're supercharged, right? And then you get back in and you focus again. Well, 2 to 3 hours of real focus time is good, right? That you can get a tremendous amount
Yeah.
done. And then you're going to want to take a longer break after 3. So I like around 4 o'clock to take a little bit longer spot break where I'll do some of the drills that I recommend in here. And then in the evening, right, there's time during dinner. If I go home and, let's say you have family, well, that's time to practice some of the skills with your family.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the most important is to practice awareness and your listening skills. Right? I call that an authentic listening exercise. Simple things like just making sure the TV is off or completely out of your house, and that you're having, conversations around things that are important to your family. I mean, again, so simple,
Yeah.
but you're developing yourself and your family as a team when we take those steps. And then the last block is the evening before you go to bed. I have an evening ritual, which is kind of the bookend to the morning ritual. And that's where we do a recapitulation of the day, and we find the silver lining for everything that happened, which we weren't really happy with. We celebrate, mentally those things we were happy with, and then we do a brief visualization for how we want our day tomorrow to go, and then any other intentions or affirmations for the night. And guess what? You'll sleep like a baby, and you clear the ground and anything that was, unpleasant during the day. So the idea there is we want to close off the day without any regrets, right?
Yeah.
Without any negative baggage trailing us into sleep, where our subconscious mind is then going to process it in our dream state, and we're not going to get a full, really recuperative night's sleep.
Yeah.
So that's it, and that's what I outline in the training plan. Now, everyone's going to have a different training plan based upon the realities of their life, how functionally fit they are, what their life situation is. People say, Mark, how do I fit this in? And the point is, you fit it in to what you're already doing with very few additional time chunks. That morning and evening, being the most dominant, but the rest of it's just kind of moving this and moving that and adding stuff into the way you go about your life. And it's extremely effective. I mean, we've had, people, several thousand people go through my Unbeatable Mind training, which is really the foundation for what I wrote here in The Way of the Seal, and really significant breakthroughs, very quickly, literally massive breakthroughs. And then for people who came to it with more severe problems like serious depression, literally getting back on track and being motivated and curing that. It's been very humbling, actually, to see the impact of this integrated training. I call it integrated, human performance, right? Where when we integrate physically, mentally, emotionally, and we're training at those levels and spiritually, then our growth tends to accelerate.
Yeah.
Especially when you're adding a dose of challenge to the mix.
Right. And just to those people out there who are saying, well, wouldn't it be nice if I had time enough to meditate and do yoga and exercise for 2 hours a day and have dinner with the family and do all that other stuff? Let's just reiterate the fact that you're not a slouch. You have been a Navy SEAL for a long time. You've trained an enormous amount of Navy SEALs, as well as professionals and athletes and everyone else. You've built like a half dozen multi-million-dollar companies. You were a CPA for a while. You have your MBA. I mean, it's crazy the amount of stuff that you've been able to achieve, not despite the fact that you do yoga and meditation and all the rest of it and keep your body fit, but because of that,
right?
Because you make time to do that.
That's exactly right. It's because of that. It's allowed me to refine my mind to be able to focus on the right things, to know what those right things are, then to be able to focus on them with laser precision until they're done.
Yeah.
And the point is that if you don't do that, you'll keep getting the results that you're getting, and you'll keep being overwhelmed with all these time commitments and all this stuff that you have. But again, I think that's very old school, right? It's easy to be overwhelmed with commitments. It's easy to be overwhelmed with the length of your workday. I mean, I was a CPA with Coopers and Lybrand, Arthur Andersen. I mean, 12-hour days were light, and that was the expectation. But could I have gotten my job done in 6 of those hours? You bet I could have. The other 6 were a complete and utter waste of time. Yeah. And so in this new economy, we need to focus on just the critical, important things, outsource, delegate, get rid of everything else. And guess what? All of a sudden, you have time for these other things that are going to make life better, are going to make, keep you on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
And those are that's the integrated development, right? For proper nutrition, taking care of your fundamental needs nutritionally, taking care of your fundamental, functional health, fitness, and movement needs, making sure you're not going to break. Because if you break, right, if your body breaks down, then you're no good to anybody.
Yeah.
And so, spending an hour or 3 to 4 times a week to make sure your body's going to perform optimally is a great investment, right? It's a tremendous investment, and it makes you feel good, and you think better, and all that other correlated things.
Yeah.
Taking time to learn how to think better, to improve the quality of your thinking, to learn how to tap into your subconscious, to route out, behaviors and belief systems that are not serving you and that are torpedoing your success. That's got to be trained for. It takes some time, right? It doesn't have to be hard, but it's those little baby steps every day.
Yeah.
Same thing with, I think intuition is another frontier, right? Cultivating, your instinct and intuition and broadening your sphere of awareness, right? Both internal and external, have a profound impact on how you approach others and approach, business problems.
Yeah.
Or challenges. And so that can be trained.
Yeah.
And so can willpower and the non-quitting spirit. So I think that this is part of, creating the human being of the future using technologies, that have been around for thousands of years.
Now I know why they call you a cyborg.
Exactly. And if I can figure out how not to get a headache by looking up in the little corner of that Google, I'll be all over it.
Awesome. We're almost out of time, but I would love for you to touch upon one more thing. And that's, you talked about how you don't want to break down. You don't want to get to that breaking point, but it seems like what you do with a lot of your Kokoro training and SEAL training and the rest of it is you break people down. So can you reconcile that idea for us?
Sure. Yeah, those training events are what I call Crucible Experiences. And if someone comes to my Kokoro camp, I'm going to put them through 50 hours of nonstop training, and it's serious training. Right? We're not sitting around singing Kumbaya and doing skits, right? We are doing hardcore Navy SEAL style training for 50 hours straight, no sleep, in the ocean a good chunk of the time, wet and sandy, cold, miserable, and it's hard. But is it effective? Do people have extraordinary breakthroughs from it? Yes, because it creates a new normal for what you are capable of physically, mentally, emotionally, right? So that's what that's a benchmark for 20x. It's a benchmark where you prove to yourself you're capable of 20 times more. Everything after that event is easier. Every challenge you face is easier. I've had SEALs come back who went through my training and they say, you know what, Kokoro Camp was harder than SEAL Hell Week.
Really?
They said because it was the first time I experienced that level of intensity and duration of training, so that by the time I got to Hell Week, I was expecting it, and I was used to it, and it was easier.
Yeah.
Not to say that if you stack the two events side by side and went through them simultaneously, Hell Week would probably be harder. But if you do this one first, it's going to make that one easier.
Right.
And so these Crucible events and the challenging training are to create new realities for my trainees, new normals of what's possible. And so as you get used to that, then you start to up your load, right? Up your capacity, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and spiritually, right? So a lot of people look at my SEAL Fit training, they say, well, that's too much volume, it's too hard. And I said, well, guess what? A 20-minute interval blast is not enough for me. I enjoy the training. There's a lot that goes on in a 2-hour training with your team. And the growth that comes from that is enormous. And it's more than just the physical, right?
Yeah.
We're training at all levels, especially when you're training with a team. And when we find that, when it gets easier and it becomes, you overcome these barriers and you hit these milestones, then you start to really enjoy it. And then we call that embracing the suck. When you embracing the suck is an attitude of learning to lean into the hard and then learning to find pleasure in it, right?
Yeah.
To literally shift the pain to pleasure, because you know that what you do today is going to allow you to do tomorrow what others won't or can't.
You're stronger on the other end.
Right. You're much stronger, and it's an upward spiral of strength and mental toughness and performance. And then you just start to leave other people behind. And I'd say that not in an arrogant sense, but you start to feel really good that you're able to accomplish so much more. And that gives you, both confidence, courage, You're strengthening your discipline, which is a character trait. And so you're developing character traits that serve you for the rest of your life. And I look at this type of training as a lifetime pursuit. It's a lifestyle. We're not training for an event or a sporting game, or we're not, eating well just to lose weight. I mean, this is a lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
that is going to have you, moving toward what I call self-mastery, mastering yourself so that you can be a better person. You can serve your, teams and communities in the world, and ultimately fulfill your purpose in life, whatever that might be.
I love it. We're out of time, Mark, but before we go, why don't you tell folks where they can find you and your work, as well as your book and your new book to come?
Yeah, right. Well, probably the sexiest place to check things out is sealfit.com. There's a lot of cool videos. It's a really fun website. So sealfit.com. If you're interested in the training that is in the book, The Way of the Seal, then unbeatablemind.com is the original training program I put together several years ago for that. It's really, really cool. And then The Way of the Seal is available, at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. We ran out of the books, like I talked about, after the first week when it was introduced. The publisher didn't print enough, but it will be back on the shelves next week. And to time stamp this is February 18th, right?
Yeah.
So we'll be back on the shelves next week. And I have a new book coming out called 8 Weeks to Seal Fit. That'll be out April 4th, and published by St. Martin's Press, available wherever books are sold.
Killer. You're not a hard man to find. I don't say this often, but I really do highly recommend Mark's work. His books, his training, pretty much everything he does is right on point. His name is Mark Devine. This book is called The Way of the Seal, and there are other ones coming as well. Mark, thank you so much for coming back onto the show. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much, Abel. It's been a blast.
Awesome.
Take care of yourself. Hoo-yah.
Hoo-yah.